Now we're going to see the concepts of SARS and SSAE. As we've got in our title, we've got audits, SARS, and SSAE, mentioned in the introduction as well. We're going to have different engagement types that fall under these standards. These are standards, and within each of them, they've got different criteria and reasons for existing. Now, exam candidates are going to need to understand the differences between these first. Definitely understand the differences between SARS engagements and SSAE engagements. SARS stands for Statement on Standards for Accounting and Review Services, so see where a review might fall under. And then Statement on Standards for Attestation Engagements. We'll talk about what attestation means as well. You also, and we'll see this in charts and graphics, you want to memorize the engagement types that fall under each of these standards. Now, SARS, these are the standards governing accounting and review services. These services include review of the financial statements, compilations, preparations. We may see engagements that fall under either of these depending on what you're going to do. We will cover that. You'll see that in nice chart format. Lastly here, SSAE, these are the standards governing attestation engagements. Attestation engagements include opinion and other attestations. You're attesting to something. You're giving your thoughts on something, such as agreed upon procedures and consulting engagements. We see here, review, compilations, preparations. Here, you may not particularly be giving an opinion on something. You're just preparing and compiling financial statements. You're reviewing them. You're not here, you're giving an opinion, you're giving your thoughts. So those are, again, generally we're building up. We're not saying anything definitive here. We're just getting these ideas in your mind, what the differences are. Make sure, taking notes and slowly formulating what these are. Revisit these lessons and slides if you need to. These are going to be important throughout the entire exam. Now, what is attestation per the AICPA? This is going to be a professional service that involves the expression of an opinion or conclusion. So important there, or conclusion. You giving it a formal opinion, so obviously that could be an audit, or a conclusion, so that's going to be, we'll see in agreed upon procedures, you're giving a very customized type of engagement there, but we're very much giving some sort of findings on what we've investigated about the reliability of a written statement or assertion that is the responsibility of another party. So we are testing to it. We are giving some credence to it. Attestation engagements are engagements in which the CPA or practitioner, but we say CPA, as I mentioned, use that possibly interchangeably, engaged to express an opinion on the fairness of a presentation, the effectiveness of internal controls, or compliance with laws and regulations. Getting this down, off to a good start. Now, here's just a nice, simple format. We like to keep it simple. Obviously, a lot of times it may not be simple. It might be a nice block of text, but with that, it's my job to break it down for you. Now, if there is attestation being provided, we're going to be issuing a report. All the way at the end of the course, we're going to have a whole lesson on what types of engagements, what's the end deliverable for those. We're going to talk in this lesson as well, what is the natural life of an engagement, from accepting the engagement to planning it out, to doing the testing, to reviewing it, to then forming a conclusion. Each engagement type is going to have a different end deliverable. If you're doing a tax engagement, which we kind of talk about tax engagements here, not really because they are obviously the topic of this test. This is audits and engagements like that, but it's kind of a comparison. We use those as a comparison because with an audit, you're auditing the financial statements, providing an opinion. With taxation, you are providing a tax return at the end. What's the end deliverable? So with each engagement type, we want to talk about what is that end deliverable. Well, if there's an attestation being provided, you're going to have a formal report. Then these formal reports, why is it important we say a formal report? Well, because the AICPA outlines what these look like. It's not just customized. You can't just make them up what you want them to be. They're going to have a formal outline for what you're going to see there. Now, if there's no attestation being provided, we're not going to issue a report. I would just definitely memorize this. If there's assurance being provided, we're going to be providing an opinion or conclusion. And if there's no assurance being provided, we will not be providing an opinion or conclusion. We're also going to dive in the types of assurance, the difference between attestation and assurance. Assurance, we're going to see reasonable assurance. We're going to see that term over and over again. This is you giving more weight to something. This is you saying, yeah, this looks good, but this is you giving significant weight. You're actually giving an opinion. So with agreed upon procedures, which again, we will have in a whole lesson, obviously I can't just implant everything in your brain and you know what I'm talking about all the time. You may have to go through all these lessons and go through them again. That's just the nature of the beast. And I do recommend that actually. If you, if you're ever just going through lessons and you want to just blow through the lessons once and then go through them again a second time. So, first round is you get a good general idea of what you're looking at overall. And second time, I did that for some exams, and I know people who do that. If it's something you're not familiar with at all, it would not hurt to try that approach. Let me just give them little tidbits of helpful information as we go through. Assurance, we are saying, in our opinion, like we are taking responsibility for this opinion, saying everything looks good. as far as we know, here's our conclusion. Agreed upon procedures, we're attesting to, we looked into something and here's our finding. Now, just another comparison here, SARS and SSAE, we're going to see this. It's always historically an important point, something to make note here. Well, SARS, as we saw, that's going to cover preparations, compilations, and reviews, which do have their own lesson dedicated to them. These do not consider internal controls. These are going to require compiled financial statements to be accompanied by a compilation report. Points to just keep in mind, if you have compiled financial statements, memorize, you need a report for those. Lastly, just examples, and soon enough, we'll see a chart on these. I keep talking about the charts, but we've got a million charts throughout the entire exam. You're going to want to memorize that under SSAE, we fall agreed upon procedures, examinations, and projections, forecast, pro forma financial statements, items such as those. As promised, here we go. Now this, you might be, oh my God, Nick, what are you showing me? This is overwhelming. This is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. It's aggressive. And the good news is you'll be seeing this chart quite frequently throughout a lot of different lessons. Also, some other good news. It may seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not, right? Compared to the entirety of the exam, this is not a lot of information. Other good news, if you memorize this, the amount of free points you could just have, also just the foundational knowledge you'll obtain from this is going to be incredible. So first off, I mean, you could just have a multiple choice question that says, which of these engagement types in the list out 4 falls under SSAE? And for this, you might say, oh, it's compliance engagements. Okay, there you go. We're also going to see, okay, which of these engagement types provides no assurance? And it might give you engagement types, and if you memorize this chart, then boom, there you go. Or which provides negative assurance, which we will go over as well. We'll talk about all of these. And as mentioned, you may have engagement types that fall under both. We see that reviews fall under pretty much everything here. We'll also talk about what that means and why that is. Now, I mean, you can have a review. We see, let's just kind of go over this briefly. Statements on auditing standards. This is just auditing standards, right? We're going to talk about this. We're going to see the differences here. So this is generally specifically to an audit. Obviously, we've got a review kind of all around. We've got PCAOB. This is going to apply to issuers, also known as public companies. Non-issuers referring to private companies. GAGAS, this is governmental. We'll see that in our governmental section. And then here we've got SSAE, and then we've got SARS. So again, just first off, memorizing what falls under which standards. Now, are we auditing or dealing with unaudited financial statements? What are we dealing with here? For audits and reviews falling under the statements on auditing standards, yeah, we're going to deal with audited financial statements with public companies. They're required to get an audit. We'll talk about the SEC, all of that as we dive further into the exam. Governmental, you're going to have audited financial statements. For these engagement types, you don't particularly need audited financial statements. And here specifically, SARS is going to fall under specifically unaudited financial statements. Now, who does this apply to? As I mentioned, we've got non-issuers and we've got issuers. Issuers being public companies. Those fall under the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. Auditing standards, that's what AS stands for. And then you've got non-issuers. And non-issuers are going to fall under generally AICPA standards, the Statement on Auditing Standards. These are all items that the AICPA has created. We've got all these regulatory governing bodies. Now, this is not specific to this exam. And other exams, we talk about different other exams as well, different other regulatory bodies. And in this case, I'll obviously define what those are as we get to each relevant lesson. For SSAE engagements, it could fall for either. You could do these for issuers or non-issuers. And lastly, SARS, this is going to be specifically for non-issuers. Again, please memorize this as much as you can. The assurances types, we're going to talk about the differences here. But generally, audits, well, not generally, I mean, audits are going to give positive assurance. For reviews, you see limited assurance. You see this again and again when we see reviews. Memorize that reviews have limited assurance. Negative assurance, compliance right here. You see that. Positive assurance, limited assurance, no assurance. Just memorize what types of assurances are given. If you're just putting together financial statements, if you're preparing them or compiling them, you're not giving any assurance. You're not giving any weight to what you're doing. You're taking what management gives you, preparing financial statements. And I am jumping ahead, right? Like not particularly jumping ahead, but it wouldn't be feasible for me to just introduce you to all these engagement types fully in this one lesson. We'll see those in those particular lessons. And then you'll see this chart again in those lessons. And you'll be like, okay, wow, it's all coming together. It's all clicking. We did build this out for a reason. It all makes sense. It's all going to come together. And I do live for the light bulb moments. I want you to have as many ding, light bulb moments as possible where you realize, oh, wow, it makes sense now. It's not just some awful, confusing, disgusting topic. Now, what opinion type are we going to give? Now, you see it says depends. it does depend. You're never going to be guaranteed to give a particular opinion type. We'll talk about what the opinions are. So when you're giving assurance, we see it's very much tied in there. So if we're giving a particular type of assurance, it depends on what opinion we're giving, a clean opinion or unclean opinion, modified. Those terms sound familiar. We will touch upon those. They don't worry. We'll touch upon those as well. Independence. Do we need to be independent for a particular type of engagement? We'll talk about that much more as we dive in. Some engagements you may need to disclose if you're independent or not, but you actually don't need to be independent. Talk about that as well. Again, just a nice introduction to these concepts. They're going to be beaten to death for sure as you go through the course. Restricted use. This means if the end report, the end deliverable of this engagement, right? We think of this like a menu. The client could come and select a particular engagement from our menu. Is that end deliverable going to be restricted in use? Meaning it's meant just for the person who engaged you and not for the general public, not for anyone else. Well, audits, no, these are going to be for anyone. Anyone can be using that audit report. We see a lot of times it's going to be no. But for agreed upon procedures, pro forma financial statements, we'll talk about why when we get to those particular lessons. These will be restricted use. Financial forecast reviews, if you're not providing assurance, these are going to be restricted use. Right? That kind of makes sense. If you're not giving assurance to something, may be restricted in use, meaning the general public, you don't want them to pick it up. If you have financial statements that are restricted in use because they are pro forma, they're prospective, they are not indicative of what may happen, it's projected results, it's not real results. And then let's say it flies out the window and falls on the ground, someone picks it up and says, wow, Microsoft is going to make $10 billion next quarter. That's incredible. Awesome. Well, that report should be restricted in use because that's not reality. And we don't want to mislead the readers, the users of the financial statements, because who are those users of the financial statements? Generally going to be regulators, but more specifically, creditors such as banks and investors. The investors, the shareholders, those are going to be the individuals who want to benefit from these end deliverables. So restricted use, that's what we're talking about. Restricting the use of the end deliverable to only those who hired you, which is management, those charged with governance. Lastly here, any special requirements for these engagement types. We're going to talk about here if there is anything specific. Well, for reviews, we'll see in the lesson there that we're going to need to only do inquiries and analytical procedures as compared to audits. We're going to basically do every type of testing. Don't need to worry about that too much there, right? We're going to see any special requirement. There will be other requirements. I mean, just too much for this one chart. So that's why if it says no, it doesn't mean there's nothing special about these engagements. It's just that will be information saved for another day. And then lastly here for compilations, we've got if there's no independence, it needs to be disclosed. As I mentioned, some engagement types, you may not need to be independent. And we'll also talk about independence in our ethics topics. But if independence is, you have to disclose if you are or you are not so that the readers understand that. And then lastly here, we see review again. Just we're going to drill down and you will memorize by the end of this course that for reviews, you're only doing inquiries and you're going to do analytical procedures. And usually for other engagement types as well, you're going to need a client representation letter, even for audits, right? This is just kind of not a catch-all by any means, just extra bonus points for these engagement types. And let's say at the end of the course, you come back, revisit this particular slide, you're going to be like, wow, it all makes sense now. I mean, maybe it makes sense to you now, in which case I say, props, that's awesome. Obviously, you've taken a look at this beforehand, you've studied already, but we are trying to get as many free points as possible, covering every point, and hopefully I'm bringing in extra points that you were not aware of. Diving into SARS and SSAE, we've got a nice concise graphic chart here where we're going to see that we've got it broken down between SSAE and SARS. Got our statements on standards for accounting and review, and then attestation standards. And what I want to draw your attention to here is going to be the section reference. You may have seen terminology that looks like this, and this is in reference to the AICPA creating their authoritative literature, their documents on how you conduct engagements for attestation, for review. You've got other ones, which we won't get into because that's not relevant for our discussion here. But we've got all these different sections in the authoritative literature, which you're going to have to see when you do your authoritative literature lookup questions. And those prompts may be something like, you are a new auditor on this engagement, and you need to find a specific reference of something, and you need to find out how to conduct an engagement. You're going to need to look in the literature, and if you're an audit, you're probably not going to look in these sections because you're going to look in the auditing section. But let's say you are doing a preparation. Oh, I might look in this section for particular guidance on how to do that. And then you list out, oh, it's ARC, subsection 2, paragraph 3, right? That sort of thing. So that's what we're dealing with here. No, I did actually work with someone who, no, this is for the taxation exam where you're dealing with the Internal Revenue Code. He actually was such a tax whiz that he actually didn't need to look into the Internal Revenue Code to find the section. He just absolutely knew, oh, it's in IRC paragraph 5, section 2, something like that. Now, that's by no means the standards that we're setting for you. You need to just be able to dive through the literature and find where the appropriate section is, but that's just a fun thing there. It's just absolutely wild. Some people are so in depth with these particular documents because they work in them every single day. Now, who sets the standards for these? It's the AICPA, specifically here for SARS. The AICPA's Accounting and Review Services Committee. For a description here, well, as we know, SSAE, this is going to deal with attestation engagements, which is going to cover examinations and reviews, agreed upon procedures, report on a subject matter, or an assertion about a subject matter that's the responsibility of another party. For SARS, this is going to provide guidance for unaudited financial statements or unaudited financial information of non-issuers. This could include preparations, compilations, reviews of historical financial statements. All non-issuer here, we see preparation or compilations of pro forma financial information and forecasts, also having to do specifically with non-issuers. So all of these connections could be made. Questions asking about non-issuers, likely it could be SARS. If we're dealing with issuers, it could be attestation. Just a lot of points to keep in mind to differentiate and not fall for the tricks on the exam. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.